Welcome to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, the podcast where insights and innovation meet. Every episode, we dive into conversations with industry leaders, experts, and change makers, bringing you the stories and ideas in the renewable energy sector that shape our world. And now, let's jump into today's episode with your host, Wes Ashworth. Welcome back to Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy. Today's episode is about a shift happening inside the grid that most people haven't fully wrapped their heads around yet. We're entering a period where demand for electricity is accelerating from every direction. AI, electrification, industrial load growth, and at the same time, building new infrastructure is getting harder, slower, and more constrained. Not because we stopped building, but because the system is becoming more complex to expand. So the real question becomes, how do you meet that demand reliably? And increasingly, the answer is not just building more, it's also coordinating what already exists in a much more intelligent way. Returning to the show is Vinny Campo, founder and CEO of Haven Energy. Since the last time he joined us, the company has evolved significantly. What started as helping homeowners access batteries has grown into something much more ambitious, building and operating distributed energy assets that utilities can rely on as real, dispatchable capacity. This conversation is about how that shift is playing out in real time, what utilities are actually doing behind the scenes, how business models are changing, why homeowners don't want to be energy managers, and how a network of homes can start to function as part of the grid itself. With that, Vinny, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me back. Yeah, it's good to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you back. And as we said there in the intro, a lot of exciting changes and things we'll get into as we talk and kind of just getting into that. So the last time you were on, Haven was helping specific customers access batteries. Today, you're talking about helping rebuild how the grid works and doing a lot more, exciting things as well, too, as we expand. Bring us up to speed. Like, what happened in between since the last time we spoke?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're almost 4 years into running this business now. Like, we really have always focused on how do you deploy a massive amount of residential energy storage to the grid. The very first version of the model was we went direct to consumer. We were offering batteries. Customers could pay cash, and we simplified the process. The next iteration, we were really focused on how do you drive down costs. And so we had shifted the models. Now Haven owns and operates all of the systems. We're able to take that combined and aggregated capacity and offer it to utilities. And there is very specific cohorts we're able to do so in a way where it was at no cost to the customer. But the mission has always been clean, reliable power for all. And we really started focusing on with the for all part of that. And so we have continued to evolve the model and expand the offering to now anyone that wants a battery. In California, which is our primary market, we have a battery subscription. So a customer can come to Haven, they can get a battery for as low as $49 a month. It's the lowest possible price you can get a battery in the California market. And, I think we're proud to be able to support what was thousands and then now soon to be tens of thousands of homeowners that want backup power, they want to pay less for their bills, and they want it to be an incredibly simple process throughout.
Yeah, it's exciting to see just kind of each iteration of that getting better and better, making a bigger impact, continue to expand, and obviously, meet your core mission. So I love that. We'll get into more of that detail as we go as well. So if you share too, we're hitting kind of a real capacity wall on the grid. I guess help us understand that. It's like, what are you seeing that convince you that, hey, this isn't just another cycle and it's something different?
I think for a long period of time, the U.S. was in this flat load growth period for electricity. And anytime there was an increase in demand, it was generally offset by, whether it's a new capacity build out or more efficient appliances. But this time is definitely different. And I think you see it every day and everywhere, like not just the grid, but like transportation is electrifying at an incredible pace. Progress and improvements on AI is like at a breakneck speed. And I think we're still in like the very early innings there. And homes are electrifying, buildings are electrifying, and the grid, which was designed centuries ago, is not designed for the moment today. And so we're still in the super early innings of the grid figuring out how do they support what is this new electrification profile. I think where we are, incredibly convinced when we look out, you can see in the demand projections how much, net new electricity do we need? And then if you take a first principles approach of how you get there, it's just not possible to build enough baseload capacity to get there. And so when we talk to utilities, when we talk to hyperscalers, like the question everyone's asking is, how do we get more capacity in months, not years, or months, not decades in some scenarios. And so, that's always the lens we've looked at it through. And, our solution is how do you deploy tens and hundreds of megawatts in months, not years? And, I think that's meeting the moment that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It does feel very different this time as we talked through just how many demand drivers are just stacking at once instead of moving in isolation. But this is kind of a whole new era, and seeing that in, like, as you said, not only the demand, but also speed, and that demand for speed as well too. So most people, they point to AI and data centers as the driver of demand. That kind of gets the most headlines and attentions, and no doubt, like, that's for sure driving demand. But in your view, maybe what are the less obvious forces that are also stressing the system?
Yeah, I think AI and data centers probably get the most eyes on it, but that's maybe 20 or 30% of the net new electricity that's coming online. I think when you look out, we're still super early, but like transportation is electrifying at a very rapid pace. Particularly buildings are electrifying and switching off different types of power into electrification. And so when you really look under the hood, those are two of the biggest drivers. But what's so interesting about that is that, if you think about a data center, that's a very large load of power that needs to get delivered to like a very specific point. As homes electrify and as transportation electrifies, those are all millions of nodes on the grid where the demand is increasing. And so from a grid planning perspective, it's very different to say, hey, for a new data center, I need a gigawatt of power. How do we go build that? Versus each of these homes is requiring more power. How do you supply that and not overload transformers or local transmission lines? And so it's really at like the micro and the localized level where you're seeing that real impact. I think folks are seeing it on their electric bills today. Like electric rates have continued to rise in the US. I think that's a trend that's going to continue. And it's not because the generation costs have increased. It's actually because the transmission costs and the grid infrastructure costs have increased to support that. And so our customers and utilities, they're looking at like, what are ways that we can drive that down? We certainly think the best way to do that is by deploying massive amounts of distributed energy, in the neighborhoods and in the communities, and have those local points on the grid. And you can really start to relieve stress and grid strain at the more localized level. And that ends up having like a very large system-wide benefit.
Yeah, no, great perspective, and definitely gives a kind of a whole picture, holistic view of all those constraints and some of those, like, ones that I guess people sort of know, but don't really think about, doesn't get as much attention, but it's all contributing and all a big part of what's happening. From what you're seeing with utilities on their side, how constrained is new supply really? Are we underestimating how hard it is to just build our way out of this?
I think we are. I think it's two things. One is that it just takes a long time to build net new power plants now. Like that's like the reality of the situation is that due to permitting and interconnection, the interconnection queues are backed up for years right now. So it does take a long time to build net new generation. But I think the thing that utilities are seeing, and you're actually now seeing this in their dockets and like their different ways that they're thinking about evolving it, it's not necessarily a net new generation problem. Like the grid is designed and built to support a peak electrical load. And it's, it has to work on like the hottest of days in the summer and the coldest of days of winter. You can't have millions of households go without power. So the grid was really built for that. Where we see them evolving is how do you maximize the existing grid that's been built? On most days, the grid is, at best half utilized. So you have all this excess capacity that's not being utilized. And so where we really see utilities starting to look at it, this is true of what Excel is doing. They've been very forward thinking. PG&E in California is doing things around this as well too. They're saying, hey, we have all of these assets on the grid that either we have no visibility into, no ability to control, or no way to actually like use those from a planning perspective. If you were to just take those assets, make them better utilized, you probably don't need as much net new generation to serve the local networks and local communities. So that's where we get really excited. It's where I think a lot of the forward thinking is happening in the utility, which is how do you take this grid that's been built, that we've invested hundreds of billions of dollars of building, how do you make that more efficient? It's kind of like our first port of call.
Yeah, it's a really good take. Again, I think something that maybe lesser known or talked about or thought about, but I think is a super important part of the equation. I often say kind of like it's an and, not an or. It's like we need to do all of these things in conjunction to really help and meet to kind of where it's headed. But it's going to be so interesting to see sort of like that grid of the future, what's going to happen, and solutions like yours, and when this is fully embraced and implemented, sort of what that looks like in the future. You mentioned something else with speed, right? Utilities not usually known for speed, but you're seeing some behavior change there. So what's quietly like shifting inside these organizations, and I don't know, are they starting to move a little faster?
I think they are. I think the Yeah, some of the utilities that we work with, like they are very forward thinking. They know that there's like change needed. And then to your point, they know it's not a either or, but like a any and all type solution. And so most do have like very innovative groups within that, like looking at whether it's virtual power plants, electrification, efficiency upgrades, like they are looking into that. And what we saw, call it 2 to 3 years ago, was really pilots around VPPs and rebate programs. And from their point of view, they're looking at how do we establish a baseline? How do we actually get more devices that we have visibility into? And then what does that actually do? You're now starting to graduate to the point now where they're saying, okay, we've run those tests, we've established those baselines, we see like the actual results that these solutions can deliver. How do you take that from a pilot to a more, program wide or utility scale wide program? And that's what the next 2 to 3 years will be defined by, which is all of these very successful pilots that have happened all across the country. They're now looking at from a very economic perspective. They've run the analysis and it shows that these programs work. Now they're moving it out of a program budget or a rebate budget into like a broader scale deployment budget. And that's where it gets incredibly exciting, is this shift from a pilot to like a full scale deployment. And that shift is certainly underway.
Yeah, exciting to see that shift. And I think, for me, it's a true signal of like the industry changing and evolving and what's happening, what's coming. As you start to see that even with utilities sort of being quicker, kind of moving, being more innovative, kind of embracing these ideas, trying to ramp them up as well too from their side. So super interesting change for sure. Let's say if nothing changes, right? So we're talking about what is happening and these positive changes, but if nothing changes at all, we stick with what we've got right this second, don't do much different. Like, what does a grid look like 5 to 10 years from now if nothing changes?
I mean, it's a good question. It's hard to tell. I mean, I think feels like all of the progress we're making as a country is like predicated on like our ability to rapidly grow our electrical supply. And I think it's our belief that like the future of America's economic engine is predicated on how do you very quickly grow the ability to produce electricity when and where it's needed. So all of these, I think all of the really exciting things that are, coming down the pipeline right now of electrified vehicles that operate autonomously, like there's so many good benefits that come from that. But that's predicated on having like the electrical demand for it. And even with what we're seeing with AI and what that can do for so many different industries, the rate limiter there is always around, do they have enough electricity and enough power when and where they need it? And so, I think maybe like the simplest way to put it is like all of these like very exciting things, like the rate limiter is the ability to generate electricity, and progress will only be slowed by that. And I think that like is probably like the downside or the bear case, which is we as a country can't grow as quickly into these like really exciting areas that the country is certainly developing around. And it's going to come at a higher cost to consumer. The good news is that like the utilities know this, and they're in like the pole position to solve this and are certainly looking at the ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. You really paint that perfectly and kind of spelling that out and talking through it, what's possible, again, sort of like what's limited if we don't. And then, obviously demand continues to go up and up and up and up, nothing changes, then we start having some issues for sure. In addition to just not being able to really achieve progress, as you said, and tons of these phenomenal technologies that are coming out that need more power. So it's a problem. It kind of gives me hope though. I mean, you see like what's possible there and you're like, it doesn't really make sense to not do it, no matter what side of the equation you sit on. So that for me gives me hope in seeing what's possible, what's available. Obviously we talked about this demand really increasing, pressure starting to kind of build on the system. We were talking about these innovative ideas, what's coming. And it's interesting always how that pressure is changing, maybe not just the grid, but business models around it. You're really seeing a lot of these shifts. So the biggest evolution since we last spoke is you moving from selling batteries to owning and operating them, and some of these other business model shifts that you did. And you started to touch on that, but just what did you learn that really made that unavoidable? And tell us about that journey.
I think for us, like, we serve two unique customer segments. One is utilities that want capacity, but the other is that if you look at our business, we're installing and deploying batteries to homeowners that have a very specific need for it. And the thing that we saw is that on an elasticity curve, at a certain price point, every single house would have a battery. So if you could offer batteries at no cost, every single household would have one. And the higher up that cost curve you go, the more like demand destruction that you get. When we looked at I think certainly residential solar, but also residential storage, our fundamental view is that that business model is broken. It's so many disjointed parts throughout that process of like groups doing lead gen and door knocking. There's third-party financing companies, there's installation, the list goes on and on, so that there's 20 different entities typically involved in installing a single battery. And what does that do? It drives the cost up tremendously. We looked at it and said, if you were to verticalize all of the parts that we think that makes sense to bring in-house and verticalize, and then only outsource the parts where it makes sense to outsource, what does that do? And just running through that analysis, it shows that you can dramatically compress the cost, the delivered cost to the customer, by about 50%. So the inevitable shift for us is, as we were looking at, how do you actually scale to tens of thousands of households? You have to drive the cost down. That's what led us to this shift where we said, all right, let's bring all of this in-house. Let's be able to still earn a very healthy rate of return, but by doing financing ourselves, sales ourselves, and installs, all of those things, you can dramatically decrease the cost and then also dramatically accelerate adoption. So it felt inevitable that to get to mass scale, you needed to make those changes, particularly from the homeowner's point of view, but also just to make the economics work.
Yeah, it's a fundamental change. And I love it just because it's not the first time I've heard it. I think some of the brightest companies in the space are starting to see this and see these signals and do similar things in different areas of just that vertical integration, kind of bringing it in, controlling more of the pieces with costs and everything else. And I think experience gets better as well too, when you're not having to, deal with all these, 7 different providers for 7 different things and all this disjointed kind of parts you're talking about. People in a lot of ways would kind of want that more simplification as well, in addition to cost savings. So I think it's such a great track and one that tends to be a trend. And I think it shows, maturity and growth in the industry as well too, as we're seeing that. You said something to me in a previous conversation that kind of stuck with me is homeowners don't want to actually manage or participate in these programs. Maybe it wasn't exactly that. Clarify if you want to, but what do they want instead?
If you think from a homeowner's point of view, if you ask someone like what they want from their electricity company, they'll probably say like, I want to pay less. I want the power to stay on. And if I need support, I want great customer service. Like something along those lines. There are like really engaged early adopters that are saying like, hey, I want to be, sitting in the driver's seat, doing the controls and optimizations myself, because I think that's really cool. And we agree, like we think that's like the super exciting part of our business, which is how do you better use, large fleets of batteries to stabilize the grid and do all the optimizations. But I think for the most part, people, what they really want is they want the lights to stay on and they want to pay less. And so we've taken that to heart. From our customer's point of view, Haven is the single touch point they have throughout the entire process. It's why we introduced this very low cost monthly subscription offer, which says, let us do all the battery optimizations and grid optimizations, financing. Let us do all of that on the back end. And for you, like you just pay very low monthly costs. Your lights will never go out when there's a power outage. We'll handle all the back end to help lower your bill. And so it's all about like customer simplicity. It's a battery that we install on your wall. Let us handle everything else. Let us make it a magical experience for you. And from a customer's point of view, I think that's what they're looking for, right? Which is like simplicity in the way their energy works and like a better customer experience.
Yeah, it's spot on. I'm smiling as you're talking just because I'm like, 100% accurate. I think for the overwhelming majority of those, homeowners and things like that, that's exactly how they feel and think about it. It's how I feel and think about it. So you do want that simplification and kind of not have to worry about it, right? So it makes all the sense in the world. You touched on this earlier, utilities that sort of trial these programs, used to give rebates. Now they want access to the asset itself. And, that fundamental shift, like tell us a little bit more about that, like where it came from, but also just more in terms of like what they're trying to do today.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that we've seen the trend happen is like most utilities start with some type of like rebate or incentive program. They're looking at like, as a utility, what are my tools that I have in the toolbox to be able to drive deployment? It's typically around like rate change structures or some type of incentive. And so the first tool that we've seen most utilities go to is some type of rebate, some way to like drive the cost point down to get customers to adopt, whether it's solar and batteries or EV charging, some type of electrification, and then to get visibility into that. And if you think about it, 20 years ago, most homes didn't have a smart meter. Utilities installed a smart meter so they can get better visibility into the data to be able to make smarter and informed decisions. And so we saw like V1, what I've called residential batteries with utilities, is like a rebate type program, drives adoption, gets visibility into it, and then they're able to measure it. And that's like the first part of it. So now they have a baseline. They understand what a battery can do. They've done some, limited deployments or tests where they dispatch all the batteries, and they can see, all right, I'm actually able to drive 50 or 100 megawatts at a single time in a given event. Well, now the question for them is, they're asking is like, well, how do we, as a utility that serves all of California as an example, you're like, how do I 100x that, or how do I 1000x that? So that it has like a real impact. Where we see it gravitating towards in a lot of the programs we're participating in, they think of it as, as a utility, they buy power from large power plants. That same model works, but it's really difficult to do if you have to go to every customer and say, let me pay you $1 per kilowatt hour for everything that you deploy. That's just like, it's too messy. It's too cumbersome. It doesn't work for the utility. It doesn't work for the customer. The alternative is that they can go to an aggregator like Haven and do the same thing and say, we need 50 megawatts in this specific territory, and we want to be able to dispatch it when we need to, and we'll pay you a certain amount for it. We're able to take that and that pricing, bake it into our pricing models. Again, to the customer, they don't see any of that. They just see $49 a month, $39 a month, right? Like all the magic happens on the back end. But the utilities are able to now buy capacity just like they would from a large scale power plant, but to do so at the aggregated residential level. But the key is to do it in the aggregation and to think of a very large fleet of residential batteries the same way they would think of any type of like larger scale generation, and to give them the visibility and the controls to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and makes a ton of sense as you kind of like go through it and frame it up and how that's happened. I'll backtrack a tiny bit, maybe for those that didn't miss our first episode or things like that. And today is a little bit different. You've said it, but I'll give you the opportunity just to kind of say it more, just simply, and that way people follow it. Like today, if people are learning about Haven Energy for the first time, what should they know in terms of what do you do and the product or service you really provide?
Yeah, Haven offers backup power as a service by deploying home batteries to customers, and we charge the lowest monthly payment in the industry to do that. It's like probably the easiest way to think of it. Like if someone wants backup power, or they have a solar system and they want to complete their solar system with a battery, there's a lot of different ways they can do that. By far the simplest is to come to Haven. We'll give you an online instant quote. You can pay monthly for that. That price will be, in the markets that we operate, by far the lowest cost that you can get. Haven will come install a battery for you. You'll still have full control and access to that battery. When the power goes out, that battery kicks on. And then when the power is, when the grid is up and running, we're using that battery to stabilize the grid and offset costs.
Yeah, that's perfect. I wanted to make sure we covered that just so people are following us and know exactly kind of how you enter this mix and what you're actually doing. I'll switch now to kind of getting back more into where we were going. We've talked about this a little bit, in terms of there's a subtle point that when we're talking about sort of batteries, the location matters maybe more than capacity. Why does where the batteries sit matter so much? Like tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the way it works is usually you have like a large centralized power plant that produces, however many hundreds of megawatts. That power then gets taken through transmission lines to local substations and then gets converted from AC to DC power and then gets delivered directly to the individual homes and buildings in that network. What happens when a specific node or a specific substation, as electricity demand grows, there's certain constraints on how much power can actually get transmitted to those certain areas, how much power a substation can actually transform from AC to DC power. One of the ways that a utility could solve that is by expanding or building new transmission lines, which is incredibly costly, takes forever with permitting. They could redo a substation. Again, same thing though, like very costly, takes a lot of time. Or you can relieve that grid stress right at the localized level. So by deploying thousands of batteries within a specific territory, you're able to decrease the overall electrical load or electrical demand on that system and bring it down so that that same substation or those same transmission lines that were supplying the power before can continue to do it even as people electrify. And that's why batteries are so important, particularly at the localized level, is that not only do the homeowner providing backup power to the utilities and to the grid operators, it reduces the strain at the localized level and allows them to defer grid upgrades. I think National Grid has probably been one of the leaders in thinking about this. They run numerous what they call non-wire alternative programs. Really what those programs are designed to is, can we use distributed resources as a way to instead of rebuilding different grid infrastructure. They, I think, pioneered that model, but you're now seeing a lot of other utilities take it and think of whether it's residential or commercial batteries as a non-wire alternative to building and the time it takes to rebuild a lot of this grid infrastructure.
Absolutely. It's a smart way to think about it. And you're hearing that more and more, become to the forefront and become a main point of like focus going forward as well, too. If you think about this at scale, right? And I'm sure this is what you think about every day. So how should we think about this network of homes? It's 1,000 homes, 10,000 homes, whatever it is. Is this actually comparable to a traditional power plant? Like, how should we think about it if we are looking at that and looking at these homes that are, you're aggregating them. You've got 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, whatever the number ends up being and beyond. Is it comparable to a traditional power plant?
It's certainly getting there. I think if you look at where battery deployments are right now, they're up 10x from they were 3 years ago. When you start to look out, they'll be up 10x again from where they are today. And so when you start getting thousands of homes together and bundled, that does offset entire large generation assets. So you start getting 10, 20, 30 megawatts very quickly. The beauty of it is that you can't go build a power plant just anywhere. They typically have to be sited like far away. There's like a lot of permitting around it. There's no world where you could build a 10 megawatt power plant or a 5 megawatt power plant in a city or in a community. But you can very easily do that with residential or commercial batteries. You can go deploy 5 or 10,000 batteries. You can very quickly get 10 or 20 megawatts deployed right where it's needed the most. There isn't transmission loss on the lines. There isn't grid upgrades. So it truly is, it is today. And particularly as you fast forward 5 years, you'll have thousands of these microgrids, 10 megawatt microgrids, and all of these localized communities where there's a real customer benefit, there's a real grid benefit, and it's deployed in weeks, not years.
Yeah, it's a super powerful analogy, and you can kind of see the power of this as it scales. We're talking about kind of redefining the grid, as it were, and using these assets. And the other thing, which I think you mentioned too, is just, even if you wanted to build this new plant, it's time. How much time is that going to take? Takes a long time to build those assets and get them going and get them connected versus batteries in a home and having those connected much quicker as well too, in terms of just scaling up that way. So if Haven works at full scale, what are you really becoming? Are you installer, financier, or something else just completely entirely? What does Haven become at full scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think those things are like parts of the business model. Like we are an installer, we are a financier, we do grid services. Haven at scale is a large scale generation or independent power producer. And that's like the way that I think utilities think of us, which is, we're an entity that will over time have what is the largest aggregated fleet of residential distributed batteries. When you zoom out far enough, we'll have a gigawatt of battery capacity under our control. And we are, just as any large scale power producer in the US is, like we are a large scale generation business by deploying thousands and thousands of residential batteries.
Yeah, I love it. It's kind of redefining, that and becoming something new as this evolves and you grow. So we started kind of like the last time we talked, we were talking about sort of those earlier versions of the model and kind of what you were doing there. And I know those earlier versions leaned into the idea of, no cost battery and very specific markets, very specific segments as you shared. And now you're offering that, subscription starting around $49 a month. You shared that. I guess, what did you learn that kind of led you to shift that model? And tell us a bit more just around the overall shift.
Yeah. I mean, I think every, continuous improvement of the business has led us to this point. Like the very first version was we had to learn, how do consumers think about batteries? And we had to learn, how do you install batteries and like what goes into installing batteries? Then we had to learn, how do you finance batteries and how do you drive down the costs? And then we had to learn, how do you sell power to utilities and how do you control the fleet of assets and how do you have that right level of control? I think at scale and where we're going towards, one of the biggest barriers to broader deployment is really around costs. And if you look at a single battery installation, 40 to 50% of that is soft costs. And so the question is, on this continuous quest to land a battery at a better than any other alternative a utility has, how do you keep driving down costs? Yes, there's like ways to push down hardware costs and labor costs, but we are increasingly focused, the model we have today is, how do you drive down all of those soft costs? So a customer should be able to go from like discovery, like learning about Haven, all the way to getting a battery interconnected without ever actually needing to talk to someone from Haven or for there being like a manual intervention. Now, of course, there'll always be like touch points. If someone wants to do that, they can. But the way that we see our business evolving, certainly on the tech side, you can imagine a world, there's hundreds of steps to get a battery installed, but they're all very manual steps. Like I have to submit this permits. I have to get an email from the city confirming the permits. I then have to schedule an installation. Certainly in the world of technology today and the power of agents, we have leaned very heavily into that. And so as we look at how do you mass deploy tens of thousands of batteries, it is through an automated deployment. So under the hood, a customer, it's a very seamless experience. They get the information that they need. Behind the scenes, everything is working 24/7, all fully automated to drive a project from discovery to interconnection, as fast as humanly possible.
Yeah, it's an incredible shift, great evolution. Like you said, makes tons of sense just for all around for the customer and utility, you, kind of everybody involved. It really does seem like a win-win around that situation and ability to really impact just more people, more homes, make that larger impact as well too, which I know is true to what you want to accomplish in your mission. You mentioned too, so California being the primary market right now. Is it available in other markets? And is that something that people can expect at some point? Like what does the future look like in terms of availability and other states or markets?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, certainly as we think about it, when you zoom out and look at like Haven at scale, anyone anywhere in the US will be able to get a battery deployed by Haven and pay a very low monthly price for it. Today we've started in California. It's been our home base due to, grid needs, the existing relationships we have, like the existing adoption of solar there. But we'll very quickly be rolling this out to new markets, new states, new territories, really under that same mission of how do you make clean, reliable power accessible to all. It can't just be California. It has to be every state. And so California has been it's the best state to start for a variety of reasons. It's also one of the trickiest from like an installation perspective and permitting perspective. And so we've cut our teeth in, which is hopefully like the toughest market to operate in, at least from a installation and permitting standpoint. We've trained all our models on how to handle all these different exceptions. And so as we think about rolling it out to net new markets, which we'll be doing later this year, all of that existing infrastructure is in place, and it's just setting up the relationships and the partnerships and expanding the operations to new places.
Yeah, exciting to see that growth, and we'll stay tuned, kind of watch that journey and what's to come and how it's going to be available in other markets as well too. But yeah, proving ground. You've done it in let's say the toughest market there is, and for a lot of different reasons in some respects. So that's great, and excited to see that expand. I'll shift a little bit, and I can't go without talking a little bit about AI. So you're now applying AI to automate some of that process and probably reducing some soft costs and things like that as well, with automating some sales pieces, design, install. Tell us a bit more about that. Like what parts of the system does that actually remove, and how does that work today with Haven?
Yeah, I mean, over time, again, like I think you'll be able to go from like going online, getting a very personalized, customized quote, all the way to scheduling your installation, all the way to getting it interconnected, like all very seamlessly, all without having, if you want to, all without like having to interact with someone from Haven. We do see a lot of customers still want some human touch or element. It is a physical construction project in their home. They want to, make sure there's someone on the other side of the company and just like get some questions answered. And so we always have like both of those options. But if you take like one very specific example, like ordering materials, the way it typically works is you have to go read the single line diagram, see what was approved, go place an actual order for a specific order date, coordinate that with an installation company, and have it delivered. All a very manual process that all could be fully automated end to end. And so what we've built is an underlying internal tooling system that underpins everything from the customer experience, from like sales to installation. And that model just trains over and over again on every installation project that we do. So it knows, hey, in this specific city or this specific HJ, this is what they need on permitting. And this is how far the battery needs to be from a window or a setback. And you just train that model over time on every single project, so that each project gets more efficient. And then, it learns from the next project. And so it's certainly on the tech side, it's where we're committing all of our resources right now, which is how do you dramatically accelerate the end-to-end installation process? Again, under the whole premise, how do you drive costs down to make it more attractive to utilities, to be able to sell more batteries, and that cycle goes around.
Yeah, so a big piece of that, obviously, and it's super fascinating to kind of see how that happens and how you're using it through that. Like if you get costs low enough, financing right, like what suddenly becomes possible that isn't today?
It all comes down to, what the what the customer ends up paying. All under the premise of like, is there a world where you can deploy batteries at no cost to the customer? And there's a world, depending on where utility prices end and like what capacity ends up going for, where like there's certain markets where that answer is yes, right? That was kind of what we were doing in California before this, is that certain areas, needed power with such intensity that there was a cost structure in place where you could deploy batteries at no cost. As you continue to push on that and you continue to drive down all your other costs, how do you push from 49 to 29 to 9.99 a month? And that's like really the trajectory that we're on, which is, from a customer standpoint, if you can offer a battery for less than a Spotify or Netflix subscription, the market that opens up is very different than what someone pays for Disney Plus, as an example, at $59 a month. And so it's all, a relative price point. And everything that we think about is how do you drive that price point down for the customer to be able to unlock like the next customer segments.
Yeah. It's super cool. I mean, suggests, I think we're closer to mass adoption than people think. Like as those costs get down, you start comparing it to some of those monthly subscriptions that a lot of people don't think twice about, it makes it a very easy decision. So as you just, continue to scale and grow and sort of roll this out, and this gets bigger and bigger, and more homes. Where does this model get the hardest? Regulation, utility integration, capital, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. If you think about it, like there are certain parts of the business that like can compound indefinitely. Things around like sales and operations, capital, like the business model gets increasingly more efficient on like the capital side, like the larger that the business gets. And it also lowers your cost of capital when you're financing $100 million of projects versus $500 million of projects. So there are certain things that actually get easier as the business scales. It also makes the business more defensible as well too. Where the challenges show up is that energy is effectively regulated at the localized level, sometimes at the state level, sometimes at the utility level, sometimes even at an AHJ level. And so there is like very specific nuances to local markets. How do you have to operate? Like the way you would offer capacity to a California utility is very different than the way you would offer capacity to a utility in PJM, as an example. And so the core parts of the model stay the same, of like providing a very low cost system to the customer. On the back end, like how do we work with utilities? What is it they're solving for? How do you solve their specific pain points? That varies based on, is it a regulated or deregulated market? Is it a, IOU or investor-owned utility versus not? That's where some of those specifics come into play.
Yeah, some specific challenges, but again, you're handling those and you make it easy for the customer. So I think that's what matters. They don't have to worry about a lot of that. So there's a lot of talk around virtual power plants. We haven't said that term yet, as we were kind of talking through all those earlier things. Some people, like, those in the industry probably, they know, they're familiar with what it is and how that unfolds. But I think the average person, maybe they have no idea. Is that term actually helpful, or does it obscure what's really happening?
It's a good question. I mean, when I think probably when the industry thinks of like a virtual power plant, they think of different assets that are participating to offset some type of electrical demand. And that, I think that's kind of like version one of what this could be. We certainly like the term a distributed power plant more, which is it's something that it's reliable, that utilities can count on. I think one of the challenges with VPP adoption is that the utility can't count on that capacity being there. They can call on an event, but there's still like customer participation required. Everything has to be set up correctly. To a utility, that's moderately helpful. We are very much believers of what we're building as a distributed power plant. It's firm capacity. Utilities can rely on it. We enter into pricing contracts with them, similar to a large-scale power plant. That, I think, is the model going forward. From a utility standpoint, like they need certainty, when the grid is stressed, that they have resources they can call on, and they know the pricing around that. That's where I think this shift from virtual, which is very good in helping reduce demand when needed, to where it actually gets to real scale, which is, large scale distributed power plants that work alongside centralized power plants. Yeah. But you have these like fleets of decentralized power plants, embedded in the communities. And that's certainly the shift that we see happening.
Yeah, I appreciate going into that. I like the distributed power plant kind of term, and thinking about that way as well too. Stepping back a bit from the mechanics, this ultimately changes sort of who controls energy and how people experience it day to day. If this model scales, who ends up with more control over energy? Is it the homeowner or the utility? Like, how does that look in the future?
I think it depends, if you're talking about like who controls the battery or who controls the home. I'm not sure that those are like that fundamentally different, but I think the promise that we always make to our customers that when the power goes out, like your battery will kick on and like power your home. So like that's first and foremost what's important from the customer standpoint. From the utilities, they want, there just has to be guardrails in place around when and where they can actually call upon those batteries. But I think more broadly, if you take like a big step back, like a battery is one part of a much broader home electrification landscape. In 10 years, the majority of homes will have things like a smart thermostat or an EV or a heat pump. Right now, those are all such disjointed nodes, even within a home. And where we get really excited, the battery in our view is like the brains or the operating system of the electrical capacity of the home. Step one is like, how do you optimize that for the customer? But step two is how do you take all of those other assets that a home has? Again, if a homeowner doesn't want to be controlling their battery and thinking about, what to do with their power, they definitely don't want to be doing that 10 or 15 times across all these other devices. And so at some point, there'll be like an omni layer that controls all of the assets in the home. And it talks to all the different devices. They're all working in unison to like better optimize the home and drive down costs for the customer. Then you can deliver more efficient capacity to the utilities.
Yeah, good clarity there, and I think that's what matters. At the end of the day, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that future, what that looks like. If you fast forward to, let's say, 2035 and beyond, what does a normal neighborhood look like if Haven succeeds?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it took the U.S. 50 years to get to 5 million homes with solar. It's projected to add another 5 million homes in the next 5 years. And so like that cycle time is compressing dramatically. And if you look on the battery side, the growth is even much more exponential than that. And so right now where it's, 1 in 12 or 1 in 13 homes have solar, it's far fewer that have a battery. Far, far fewer. 1 in 500 or 1 in 1,000. When you fast forward, by 2035 and, call it 10 years from now, the number is going to go from 1 in 500 to 1 in 10 or something like on par with what solar has. And so like the market and the opportunity is enormous. It's like first inning or like first or second inning of what the adoption of energy storage looks like. 10 years, like the cells and all the components that go into the battery will have compressed so dramatically that the cost of deploying a system will go from where it is today to, a very small fraction of that. So I think it'll be more often than not, you have a home with a battery, you'll have one intelligent layer that controls all that in the house. And that's certainly the role that Haven intends to be, which is the largest developer and aggregator of residential energy storage in the US.
Yeah, exciting vision for sure. Is there a future where you see like every home in America has a battery? It's just normal part of it. Like, do we ever get to that point somewhere down the line?
I think without a question. It's, we look at it as, most homes have a, whether it's a hot water heater, in certain climates an AC, it'll just end up becoming like such a no-brainer part of the home. What you're already seeing is that like power prices diverge dramatically. Power is really cheap overnight, really expensive during the day. As that price spread continues to widen, the opportunity cost of not having a battery is only going to increase because the battery smooths that out for you. So the real inflection point will be, when does it make economic sense to not, when is there not economic sense to not have a battery versus having a battery? That day is coming. That day is not today, but that day is coming within a decade or so. And at that point, the costs get low enough when there's always an economic incentive. Every home certainly will, without question, will have a battery installed in it.
Yeah, I love that. I agree. That day is coming. I asked it because I believe that as well. I like the comparisons of like, an AC unit, a water heater. Like it's just, you don't even think about it. You have one. Batteries, I believe, will be the same way. So I love that. And that very hopeful future there. So I'll end a little bit on a personal note. So we touched on this first episode, but we'll retouch. So you've lived through outages growing up. You grew up in Louisiana, I believe. And so you dealt with that firsthand, and dealt with that personally. And now you're building part of the system that could really prevent this. And I'm sure it's, tied to a deep personal mission as well. What does solving this actually mean to you personally?
Yeah, I mean, it's the reason we started out, building this business, right? Like I was in high school when Hurricane Katrina hit and we were without power for months. I lived in Houston during Hurricane Harvey. I was in Austin during the winter storm that nearly took down a large portion of the grid. I think as a founder, you work 100 hours a week obsessing over a single problem. It has to be a problem that's incredibly meaningful to you. The ability to provide, the energy of the future. I think that's like, to me, such like a meaningful and personal problem to get to solve. I'm also incredibly fortunate, it would be remiss to not say, like, we have gone on and built what is like an incredibly like passionate, dedicated and hardworking team that's also very motivated to solve that mission. I have two amazing co-founders that are like 100%, committed to that same mission too. And so like the rewarding part for me, it started out that we started to get to tackle this problem. What's much more rewarding now is that like we have a whole team that's like building that shared mission together and working super hard to race to that day where every single home has a battery, and the team is pushing super hard to be the leader there, to be the one that gets there first to drive that to happen.
Yeah, I love that so much. That personal connection, I think, just adds a different weight to the work. And as you said, now building on that in a team that's really bought into that, it means something special. And wanted to definitely touch on that. It's a great way to wrap it up. Vinny, this was a great conversation. What stands out is this isn't about one solution replacing another. It's about the grid becoming more layered, more dynamic, more coordinated than it's ever been before. For everyone listening, the big takeaway is this: the future of energy isn't going to be defined by a single technology. It's going to be defined by how all of these pieces, centralized infrastructure, distributed assets, software, markets, actually work together as one system. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow the show, subscribe, share it with someone that's thinking about where energy is headed. And with that, we will see you next time on Green Giants.
This episode of Green Giants, Titans of Renewable Energy, was brought to you by Lee Group Search. If you enjoyed today's discussion and are looking to recruit top talent for your company or find your next career opportunity in the renewable energy sector, visit leegroupsearch.com. Let's continue driving the future of clean energy together. Until next time, keep pushing toward a greener future.